Hello, YouTube. Today, I'm going to be doing a video on 2K. Well, this is just one of the videos, but I'll be doing a video on the death donor rule and a way that we can fix it. This is a part of my bioethics class. This is an assignment, but I decided to post it on my YouTube channel, so I hope you enjoy. With that in mind, I'm now going to begin. So the ethical question is this: Is does the death donor rule, as it exists today, need to be changed? The proposal of Sac State is that yes, it needs to be changed or at least modified to a very small degree. Now, what is this degree? Well, consider this. Consider that with how the death donor rule works now. So the death donor rule is basically that you cannot take an organ from somebody until 5 minutes after they're pronounced dead. This is to make sure that the person is fully dead and that there's no exploitation going on, and so then after about 5 minutes or so, then doctors can take out organs. However, this creates a problem because a lot of the times much of the organs that are taken out cannot be used because they've already shut down, and the damage that is caused from taking them out of taking them out of the dead body has already been done, and you can't reverse those organs. And so, because of that, right, it creates this dilemma where we want to get as many organs as possible, but we also want to make sure that we are not exploiting anyone, that we're not taking organs prematurely. And so that's why this debate exists. We propose, however, that there is a slight modification to the rule. And our thesis is essentially that we want to make sure that that we consistently follow the original rule when there is no informed consent involved. So as long as they sign a DMV contract or whatever it is, they can do that, or they consented to their organs being donated. However, we believe that there can be another more informed version of consent where as soon as a person dies, then their organs are removed, right? So they don't have to wait. So basically they can bypass the entire death donor rule. And there are three main arguments we have for this thesis. The first argument has to do with patient autonomy, that this is going to increase autonomy. The second is that it actually will or potentially could increase the number of organs that we receive. And finally, that it does at least solve this ethical dilemma. So, what about the first argument? Well, this argument basically says that if we create a new kind of consent form, in this case, an informed consent form, to someone that's dying, like someone on their deathbed, then this kind of solves the issue regarding informed consent. Because currently, how the current system works is, you go to a DMV and they ask you, like, oh, do you want to become a organ donor? And that's not real. I mean, yes, it is consent because you're signing off to it. But typically, most people, 99% of people, when they sign that, when they check the mark, right, they sign, okay, I want to become you know, a donor, right? They're not really like thinking about, okay, well, when is this actually going to apply? Because typically, you sign that off when you're like 16, 17, or 18 years old. And then you don't really think about it until like much later, like, when you're in your 50s or 60s, where you were like, you're on your deathbed and like there's a potential that, there might have to be you might have to take out your organ. And so this creates a kind of issue where, at least the current state of things, they don't allow you to bypass that rule. That as long as, when you sign that contract initially, you have to wait 5 minutes. Even if you want to donate your organs, you still have to follow the death donor rule. And so what this solution does is it allows people to donate their organs, right? If they're on their deathbed, that's follow very strict criteria, but they can, right? They can bypass the donor death rule because they are able to say, hey, I'm going to die and I just want to donate my organs so you can take them out, whatever, right? So now you're more informed. And that's kind of the That's what we want. We want more informed consent in regards to these things. The second argument for this is that this could potentially increase the number of organs that come about. So remember I mentioned earlier that one of the big problems currently is like, okay, because the donor death rule is around 5 minutes, like the organs could be damaged right within the 5 minutes of someone being pronounced dead. However, if we apply this modification to the rule where there can be informed consent involved, then this bypasses the issue, and so we could actually get better organs, or let's say more livable or viable organs, because we took them out as soon as the person was pronounced dead. And of course, this was fully consistent with their consent in regards to that. And so it solves that issue. The final thing is, or the final argument I should say, is that this pretty much, at least I would say, we could say, solves the dilemma, because remember the initial dilemma, we want to maximize the number of organs that we have while also taking into account patient autonomy. Here we are taking into account patient autonomy, and we are potentially increasing the number of organs that exist given that they are taken out as soon as someone dies, right? And so in this sense then we could say that this sort of solves the ethical dilemma. Now, of course, there are three potential objections that people might have. The first objection has to do with timing concerns. The second objection has to do with exploitation. And finally, trust concerns. So what about timing concerns? Like, for example, like let's say that someone came into a hospital and they just could not consent. And like they're basically like they're on their deathbed, but they are not able to they're not able to um, provide the informed consent. What do we do in that situation? Well, on this framework, what we would say is, okay, if they cannot provide informed consent, but yet they still are organ donors given their initial consent form, the DMV form, then we just go back to the old model, right? So in this scenario, we would say, okay, we just go back to the old model. Okay, if they cannot provide informed consent, like in the case if they're passed out or whatever, then okay, then we go to the old model. Okay, but if they can't provide informed consent, then we could bypass the death donor rule, at least the one that we have right now. And so I think here there are really no timing concerns because, um, as soon as someone's pronounced dead, right? If as long as they consented, then the organs are taken out. And in the case where they cannot consent, then we just go back to the old rule where it's 5 minutes in this case. The second objection has to do with exploitation. And so the objection goes like this. Well, Kyle, I mean, you're assuming that there's this exploitation involved, where essentially like doctors and stuff will come in and like try to exploit certain, populations. But here, notice how again we are involving at least two types of consent. So we're involving the initial DMV consent and the informed consent. And here we see that it's really hard to exploit something that strictly involves those criteria. And so we believe that regulations can solve this issue. Now, what about the final objection? And that is that it erodes trust in our institutions. It erodes trust, let's say, in doctors. Now, this is a very interesting objection, but I also don't think that this objection works. The reason for this is very simple. Consider this, okay? We have to give trust to our doctors all the time, right? We have to ensure that they have to go through a very rigorous process of making sure that they follow ethical standards. I mean, that's the job of every doctor, right? That's why it takes a long time to become a doctor. And so here we see that while it is true that that might be the case in certain situations, there are going to be certain bad apples, right? You could say. This is really like looking down upon doctors as a whole, because obviously we do trust doctors a lot, and we certainly would say that there needs to be a specialized, in this case, there's going to be a specialized team of doctors that will be involved in each of the donor cases. And so we say that all the objections to the case don't work. And so to summarize, basically, remember the initial problem. The initial problem was this, that essentially, we have this problem where we want to maximize the number of organs we get, but also make sure that there's patient autonomy involved. And here we say that not only can we potentially increase the number of organs that we receive, but we can also, because we provided an additional consent form in regards to the death donor rule, then it actually not only helps us to increase the number, the consent involved in the process, but also helps to potentially increase the number of uh, organs we receive in the process. And so that's all I have to say in regards to this case.